All right. Okay, so welcome everybody. I would love to just hear your name and what department you're in. And also it'd be great for me to know what you're considering studying. So if you're at dissertation stage or not even yet, if you could just tell me about the topic of your potential study, that would help me a little bit. So maybe we can start with the people in the room.
Oh, I can start.
Okay.
So my name is Puri. Now I am in pilot stage. I'm trying to finish my pilot this semester, and my study is qualitative research. At this point, I do hand coding because I only have 6 participants. And my research focus is on autonomous language learning. Basically, I'm focusing on the mechanism of community of practice in autonomous language learning. So I was learning about the mechanism of this practice and how this domain help autonomous learners to improve their learning experience and to connect with other members in the community.
Great, thank you, Rory. Okay, maybe you in the back.
Yes. Hello, my name is Roberto, and I'm also from ETAP. I'm a first year PhD student.
Okay.
So I don't really have, a good notion of what I'll be studying.
Okay.
But I consider my focus to be language and technology.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that's it. Is there anything else that I missed out?
Excellent. No, that's great. And welcome.
Hi everybody. I'm not saying everybody's for the sorry for the wide audience, but I'm Tom. I'm just starting my 2nd year, and like Roberto, sort of still figuring out what I want to do, but I think I'm interested in the co-configuration of learning spaces, like students and teachers working together to sort of shape different learning spaces and resources, both face-to-face and online, like during knowledge building inquiry.
All right. Thank you. All right, and then over here.
Hi, my name is Arwa. I'm also a doctoral student. As Rory, I'm at pilot study stage. I'm planning to finish it this semester. I'm working on sex education, specifically working on sexual health and like parents' attitude toward it and students. I will interview a bunch of students and parents and physicians about their opinion about sex education and introduce it to Saudi people.
Great, thank you. Okay, so everybody online, I'm just going to go across the top. So Adele, if you could tell us where you're at with your program.
Yes. Sorry, I'm doing some back end stuff, letting some people in. But yeah, I'm Adele. I'm a 6th year PhD candidate. So I'm actually ABD. I'm hoping to graduate in May. And I'm doing a mixed method study. And for my qualitative part of it, I am interviewing some of the people who participated in my survey online. And so for that, I need to learn how to do coding. And yeah, I'm also president of ETAP Docs. So I'm helping with the back end stuff. So very happy to see everyone here. Thank you, Dr. Wilcox, for leading this.
Good to see you again, and that you made so much progress since we last talked. Could you tell me again that the topic that you ended up studying?
Yes, so I am studying learning strategies specifically for foreign language students, and in my case, students who are native English speakers acquiring Chinese as a foreign language.
Okay, that's okay.
Yeah, so.
Great, you followed through with your plan.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay, how about Jillian?
Hi, can you guys hear me? Yeah. Hi, I'm also from ETAP. I'm 4th year. I'm now preparing my proposal. I am studying computer science education now. I'm working with Dr. Ni. We're working on the project. So my proposal is about to learn how our PD can help teachers to implement CSDL curriculum, especially helping them to do some culturally responsive pedagogy implementing in their classroom.
Great. So glad you're working with Dr. Nee. That's great.
Yeah.
Isabel, how are you?
Hi, everyone. So I'm Isabel. I'm not really sure what year I'm in. I'm beyond proposal and working on my dissertation. So I'm ABD as Adele. And so far I did coding, some qualitative interviews and other protocols that I use to gather data, but hand coding because I only had 3 cases. I'm moving into a massive volume now, and I would need some qualitative, hopefully, software that could help me with this. And my interest is on the effect of a science conceptual intervention on recently arrived Spanish speaking kids in 4th and 5th grade, more or less. So I'm not sure if I'm missing anything.
No, that's good. Okay, thank you, Isabel. How about Chelsea?
Hi, my name is Chelsea. I'm part of the EPL program. I'm in the dissertation proposal phase right now, and I'm writing about urban special education teachers, retention and attrition of getting teachers into the workforce. So I'm just trying to get my proposal in place for the semester.
Thanks, Chelsea. And Chelsea, I'm advising Chelsea as a chair, so we talk a lot. And Sturdy.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sturdy. I am a 5th year doc student in ETAP. Like Arwa and Wuri, I'm working on finishing my pilot right now. And I am studying gamification in online learning, specifically looking at motivation and using self-determination theory to interpret why students in gamified contexts make the choices that they make.
Okay, great, thank you. Sounds really interesting. And Jess?
Hi, I'm Jess Wenger. I am a doctoral candidate in the EPL program. I am doing qualitative study. I'm studying sense of belonging of students of color attending liberal arts colleges. I'm just getting out of the IRB approval stage, and I'm hoping to collect data later this semester and in the winter, and hoping to finish in May. And I know Dr. Wilcox, we've talked over the summer about my project, and it's coming along.
Yes, you're collecting interview data?
Yep, collecting interview data, yes.
And Fred?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Adele, for letting me in. And thanks for Dr. Wilcox for doing this. I am in, I technically, I think my 2nd year, but I am in the EPL program. I did my school building leadership, my school district leadership all through SUNY, and it launched me into this PhD program. I am still, I'm in 714 with Dr. Trollian, so we are learning about qualitative studies, and I've been working a little bit with Dr. Wilcox around thinking how I can support the work she's doing with New York kids and how that could launch into some PhD dissertation work. And my area of interest is levels of trust in educational leadership, especially during crisis.
Okay, great. And Andre?
Hey, I'm Andre Foisy. I'm an EPL doctoral student in my, I don't know what year, my last year of coursework, thank God. And I'm interested in using NVivo qualitative studies to really, I'm interested in looking at how American accreditation in higher education does its work. So I'm taking an anthropological approach to my dissertation, and I'm either going to be doing some kind of analysis of documents and or interviews with people who serve as the arm of accreditation or peer evaluators.
Okay, thank you, Andre. Gina? Or I'm not sure how to pronounce it.
Yes, you're right. Hello, I'm sorry I can't turn on my video, but anyway, I'm the first year. I mean, this is my first semester as a doctoral program of ETAP, and I'm interested in qualitative research method, so that's why I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and I think we have one other person in the room. Yes.
Hi, my name is Kana. I'm a second year EPL PhD student. And I'm working with Dr. Aaron Benabat on a global citizenship education project with UNESCO FSIU. And for my dissertations, I'm thinking of doing a qualitative study on international student learning assessment in Lao PDL. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you again. And maybe you can share, I'd love to hear the update because your team, we had a discussion over the summer
Yes.
about how to use NVivo. So I'm excited to hear how you guys are using it, the tool. Let me see, Alejandra Pickett. Hi, how are you?
Hi there. How's everybody? It's so nice to get in and to see everybody. We're doing introductions, right? So I'm Alexandra Pickett. I am the director of online teaching at SUNY Online. I'm in my 15th year in this program. I take one class every semester. So I'm getting there. I'm working on my pilot, which hopefully will lead to the dissertation. The topic is personal epistemologies in online STEM faculty, and I'm hoping to do kind of a mixed methods thing. So there's a qualitative piece to it. I've done coding by hand, and it's excruciatingly painful, but it's also really fun. Like I love doing it. But you know, you can only do so much and have a day job and a kid and a dog and a husband. So so I just saw that this workshop was happening, and I knew that some of my friends would be in here, and I knew you were doing it, Karen. So I just wanted to come in and check it out and you know, see what NVivo was all about.
Thank you. Yeah, great. Did I miss anyone? Okay, I think we've got everybody. Great. Thank you again, everybody, for taking the time. I have a whole lot of things to share, and I'm just really interested in hearing your questions as we go along. So I do want this to be conversational as well as hopefully just informative. I'm looking and thinking about you know, where you guys are all at, and you're in very different places, maybe with your knowledge about qualitative research, and also just, you know, how to use different tools. So I'm going to hopefully do a little bit of everything that will, you know, appeal, and you'll walk out of here, or not walk out of here, I guess I should say. We'll end at 6 o'clock with a couple of new things that you've taken away from this. I encourage you to, you know, maybe have a pad of paper or a Word document open that you can keep some notes as we go along. And I'm going to show a PowerPoint and guide you through that, but I'm going to hopefully also, if everything works okay, toggle between a few different documents. I've got in store for you today, and I feel like I'm on one of those cooking shows, you know, so today, what we have on our menu is we're going to start off with a little bit of background about just how we foreground qualitative studies. Some of this might be a repeat of things that you've studied in different courses along the way. I used to teach the 777, 778 sequence in ETAP, and since then I've taught different kinds of qualitative courses. So you may have seen some of this if you've taken those courses in the past. Some of this information anyway, but I think it's important because everything that you do when you're getting to this stage of, you know, designing your study, you're including your data collection methods and your data analysis, and then eventually how you interpret it to make any sense out of it, are all very much connected. So I kind of want to just build from the foundation out and then take you into a deeper dive into like what this actually looks like when you have data that hopefully is going to inform your research questions, and you have options with how you really massage the data to show things that you care about and that you're focused on in your study. So yeah, there'll be some detail examples from that. So to get started, we're at 4:20, so we're going to kind of whip through some things. I have one activity in here where I'm going to ask you to take a look at a case study. So in this first slide, I'll get us started here. There is a, oh, you're not going to see this link, are you? Because you guys did, yeah, I didn't share the PowerPoint with anybody. But I'm going to show you where I would like you to open up in your browser. I'm a research and development director of a project called New York Kids. And one of the easy ways for you to arrive at this document that I'm going to ask you to take a look at is to type into your browser ny-kids.org. Okay, and once you get there, what I'd suggest is you go to the Research Results tab. Mine is running really, really slowly today. So I'm hoping this doesn't take yours too long. Okay, and then what I would suggest to get to the document that I'd like you to take a look at is go up to the search bar in the right-hand corner and type in the word Malvern, M-A-L-V-E-R-N-E, and then just hit search. Maybe the easier way to do this, I just thought of this, is just, I'm going to drop this link.
Professor, do you want to share the screen?
Oh, is it not?
I can share the screen.
Oh, well, actually, I'm just going to drop this in the chat. I just thought that this might make some sense to do it this way. So when you get to, if you just tried that one method, this is an easier method. So you can just click on this link and you're going to get a case study to show up. So I'd like you to just have that ready when we get to it, because I'm going to show you how we built to this case study. Okay. So back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so here are some of the objectives I had for today. My big goal anyway is that you understand the key components of a qualitative research study design. So the design components that you want to be thinking about, and then know how qualitative software can be used to facilitate qualitative analysis. So some of the specific objectives I had for today is for you to use a model of qualitative research design to inform your own designs. So what I would suggest for you while I'm walking you through this is I'm going to give you a kind of framework to think about qualitative designs that includes three major components. So when I get into these components, you might want to start either on your little scratch pad of paper or on a Word document, start to note some things that are kind of key things that you're taking away. So just to kind of preload that in your thinking, we're going to talk about theoretical frameworks as one bucket of things that need to be considered. The second thing is called a research approach, and that's a word that you may or may not have heard of when we talk about research design, but I'll explain what that is. So that's the second bucket. And then the third bucket is really about methods. And you've probably heard a lot about methods, but we're going to talk about methods. So those are the three big buckets that we're going to be thinking about in terms of design elements. The next thing that I'm hoping for today is that you're able to relate the coding of data to the overall process of analysis and interpretation of data, so that you can see the connections between the kind of why and how we code data and the eventual goal, which is to be able to interpret and make sense out of something. And then the last thing is just very practical. And this is when we just are gonna be like, okay, this is the nitty gritty of how NVivo works. And this is to use the features of NVivo to conduct analyses. And these include things like loading source files. I'll show you how that's done. You can also go on the abundance of YouTube videos to see this. Okay, after I get done with my piece, you can go out there and find a lot of things. So that's, you know, other sources of information about the nitty gritty, but I'm going to try to show you some of the tips that I personally use when I try to organize things. Also assigning attributes to source files and how important that is, and how to assign codes or what they call nodes in NVivo to data, and then extracting code reports or making queries. Okay, so those are some of the things. So again, two caveats to this is that NVivo is just one of many different qualitative software programs that you can use to do this kind of analysis. And to the point, a bunch of people on this call already have said, like, okay, I've done hand coding. You can hand code. People do color coding. They use Post-it notes. There's a variety of different ways. Ultimately, what we're just trying to do is see where we have patterns, where we have discrepant data, how we can reorganize the information we're collecting in ways that make sense. So there are so many different tools that you can use, and NVivo is only one of them. So my caveat here is that NVivo is just one tool. A lot of people use different things. I've used a couple of other programs. LSTI is one that a lot of people use, and I've used Hyper Research. That's particularly good for case study analysis. But they all pretty much do the same things, but with some nuances here and there. Okay, so that's
Dr. Wilcox.
Yes.
Would it be possible for you to share your screen on Zoom, because all of us online cannot see the PowerPoint clearly and we want to be able to follow along?
How do I do that?
If you go to your share screen, the green button at the bottom of your Zoom, you should be able to select the PowerPoint that you have open.
Thank you for saying that. Let me see if I can do this.
Will we be able to have a copy of the PowerPoint as well?
Yes, and I apologize. I didn't do that right off the bat.
And for no, it's okay. Thank you so much. And for anyone who came in a little bit later, we are recording the session. So it's going to be on the ETAP Docs website once we get it edited and everything.
Different screens. Okay, so that's this. This is that. And then let me see, share screen. Okay, thank you for saying that. So this is the one we want to show. Okay. So I'm gonna have to remind me of this, okay, so I don't lose you along the way, folks, because I've got like 4 different things open at the same time. So don't hesitate to do just what Adele said.
Great, we can see it now. Thanks so much.
Can you see my PowerPoint now?
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, so somebody cue me if I screw that up in the future, because I'm gonna go between a couple of different NVivo files to show you where we're at. So this is what I was just explaining verbally, and that's in the slide, and I will share the slide with all of you after this if you're interested. So just a foreground, because everything that you do down to the nitty gritty of what attributes you assign to your data, your source files, I should say, and then what codes you use, how you set up your NVivo file, links directly back to these kinds of questions about the why behind your qualitative design. So your why is connected to a theoretical framework, whether you like it or not, I guess I would say. So the paradigm that we're coming from in qualitative research is one that says that most everything is up for our interpretation, and that we are never free of our own perspectives and bias as we approach trying to study anything. So the theoretical framework piece of the puzzle, when you design a qualitative study, is going to be important for you to be aware of, and what your options are, and how strongly you foreground a theoretical framework, or how much you move on the other end of the continuum towards grounded theory, which is ultimately an intent to discover some kind of theoretical finding. So, and then you have options for approaches and methods. So all of these things come into play as you are starting to kind of build the house of your research design. So then we articulate our methods through our research questions, through our choice of our context. So what kind of setting or settings that we're interested in studying, and then what people or groups of people we're interested in studying in our participant sample. And then we have an abundance of different options in terms of data collection, and then in terms of data analysis as well. So when we think about research design, I like to think about it as being multi-layered in those kind of 3 buckets that I was talking about earlier. So when you're thinking about designing your study, whether you're already in it already, or you haven't even started to design, to be kind of clear about where you're coming from in terms of your beliefs about what matters here and what lens you want to look through. So that's where theoretical frameworks come in. And then, as I explained earlier, approaches are kind of a broader umbrella term for what some people call methods. Approaches mean that you have many different ways you could go about doing your study, right? And methods are the specific things, in my view anyway, that you do in terms of data collection, like interviews or focus groups or document collection. And then they also have to do with data analysis methods. So discourse analysis, for example, or constant comparison, or a couple of different methodological choices for data analysis. So those are the three big buckets. So one thing for you to be thinking about is, okay, what is the lens that I'm coming at with my study? And so I have this question up here. I'm not sure if you can see it on the screen, but as the researcher, you're asking yourself through what theoretical or conceptual lens or lenses will this study be conducted? And you'll need to articulate that in any study. Anything you read and that is qualitative in nature will have some statement about answering that question for the reader or the audience of the research report. And so a theoretical lens in that bucket, I just put a few examples. In my own studies, I've used socio-ecological frameworks quite a lot. Sometimes identity theory, which to me is a little more in terms of conceptual versus theoretical. I see the difference between conceptual and theoretical, and that concepts are the core of a conceptual framework. So the concept of having an identity, for example, versus social ecological, which is proposing that X and Y and Z are connected to each other in some way. Okay, and in the case of social ecological, we're looking at the connections between micro level settings and exo level or macro level settings, and there are a few others in there, chronosystems that are also included. And then there's sociocognitive. So that was just another example of a theoretical lens. So it's important to be thinking about what are those things that I think need to be in my line of sight. I oftentimes think about theoretical frameworks as if you're going to put on a pair of glasses to look at the world, you could put on glasses that are like rose colored, and it would reveal certain things about the world, and you'd see the world through that lens. Whereas if you put glasses on that have a blue tint to them, you'll see different things, right? So this is what theoretical lenses do for us. They help us as researchers figure out, what am I actually focusing my attention on? Because none of us are capable to be kind of omniscient and see everything from all perspectives, right? It would be great if we could, but we can't. So it's really about being aware of what vision you have for this particular problem that you're looking at in your study. The second piece that you think about is, actually, did I just skip something? So this is about approaches, actually. The central concern in different approaches, I just included here just a few of the big ones that people talk about. And this caveat here in terms of approaches has to do with that we have all sorts of hybrid models and many, many different ways of doing qualitative research. So phenomenology is just one example of an approach that you can take. And the focus of that is on a phenomenon, okay? Like marginalization, for example, might be a phenomenon that you're interested in studying among a certain population. Grounded theory, as I said, is really going to be focused on theorizing and emerging theory out of a study. Case study is going to be focused on the kind of details, the nitty-gritty about what makes up for a particular experience in a case. That could be a person, it could be a group of people, it could be a whole country. It depends on what the case, you define the case as. Narrative inquiries are going to be focused more on those individual storytelling, so making sense of the world through story. And ethnography is going to be more interested in rich, deep detail about a particular group or a culture or a climate. So here I just have a few slides. I might not need to go through in a whole lot of detail, but phenomenology is an example of an approach. We start to ask questions about how do we think the things happen in the world, what reality is. That's an ontological question. So when you're designing a qualitative study, you have to be thinking about what are the perspectives or assumptions I have about what reality is. And then the second is an epistemological question of how do we come to know a reality, right? And so again, qualitative research lies in this paradigm or interpretivist in the sense that we assume that people bring with them different perspectives and biases, you might call them, to the world, and that they need to be very straightforward and transparent about those biases and perspectives as they approach a study. So in phenomenology, on the right side, you see here that the focus here is on understanding how meaning is made and that meaning does not exist somewhere out in the world. And as the researcher who takes on a phenomenological approach, you're seeing yourself as an inquirer and as part of the phenomenon. So for example, if you were interested in marginalization, you would be always associating throughout your study with this concept yourself. And then if we move on to grounded theory, you can see that the questions on the right hand of your screen, I'm going to just move my little over here, or I actually went to the bottom, is that we're considering that the nature of reality is revealed through analysis of the complexity and variety of experience and phenomenon, and meaning is defined and redefined through interaction. And that a researcher who is focused on grounded theory or attempting to develop theory in their study comes to meaning in a very iterative way. So they code, they recode, they memo, they do interpretation consistently throughout their data collection and analysis. And then what they try to develop out of their study is some kind of explanatory scheme, some kind of theory, some kind of connection of something to something else in their study. Okay, and then the next one, oh, sorry, go back, is narrative. And so as I was saying before, you can do hybrids of these different kinds of models. So a narrative inquiry is going to assume that the nature of reality is revealed through stories. And then as a researcher, if you're a narrative inquirer, you're making, I make my subjectivities as transparent as possible. In this retelling of other stories, I collaborate with participants. It tends to be a very collaborative kind of research design as you look to kind of negotiate meaning with your participants. And then the last one I highlighted here was just about ethnography. And ethnography, again, the nature of reality is revealed through close and extensive time in contact with people in particular contexts and cultures. So this oftentimes ethnographies take, months and months and sometimes years and years to complete, because at the end of the day, the researcher is attempting to capture the experiences and values, beliefs, norms of some group of people. And they keep explicit that inescapable problem of representation, that one can never be inside of something when you are on the outside being a witness to it. Okay, so all of these things are super important when you think about how you engage in a qualitative study. And I'll explain a little bit more about that, but just to asterisk for yourself, all of this means something with how you use tools like NVivo at the end of the day. Because, for example, in ethnography that I have on the screen right now, the assumption here would be that you would be keeping interpretive memos throughout your data analysis, and that you would find places to record that information, and you would do it systematically and in a disciplined way, and that those memos would then become part of your data set, that you would actually call them out in your methods section, that interpretive memos were kept, they were dated, they were used in your analysis.
Dr. Wilcox, did we skip the case study slide? Would you mind just going back? I think that we might have gone over it.
Did I let me see here. Was it next? Oh no, I might have, I feel like one of my slides was actually, oh yeah, thank you for coming back today. Yeah, case study, because actually that's the example I was going to give. I do a lot of case study analysis. So case studies really, the focus here is the nature of reality is revealed through in-depth description and analysis of a case or multiple cases. As I said before, cases could be one individual to whole groups of people, to a whole state, to a whole country. It could be multiple organizations, lots of different things. You define the case. And then as the researcher, you are seeking to discern and pursue understandings intrinsic to a case or a set of cases. So you rely on detail. The assumption here is that, or expectation, I should say, with a case study is that you have multiple sources of data that give a very rounded view of what is this place or this set of people or this person about, and what can we learn from this. So oftentimes case studies have, for data collection methods, things like documents complemented by interviews, complemented by focus groups and observations. So I'm going to come up for air for a second and just see if people have any questions at this point. Questions, comments, anything, experiences you wanted to share about these design choices? Okay, you're like, no, just keep presenting. Okay. All right, so back to the third bucket, okay? So we started with the theoretical framework. I talked a little bit about how important that is, that you have a clear description of the perspective that you're bringing to bear, what lens you're looking at your data through. Just gonna try to drop that down for a second. And then we talked about approaches. There are a variety of different approaches. There are hybrid approaches that you can use, and they all have their advantages and disadvantages. They all have expectations of what the researcher is bringing in terms of the intent of the design. And then we have this last bucket about methods. And so methods include data collection methods and data analysis methods. So in terms of methods, as I just said, there are a variety of different methods of data collection you can use in qualitative studies. These are kind of the most popular. Observations, interviews, focus groups, documents, artifacts are a different kind of document that usually a participant prepares for you. Surveys, those can be open-ended kind of questions in surveys, and they may be complemented by Likert scales survey questions. And then, oh, I'm sorry, I misspelled questionnaires, but questionnaires also can gather important data about individual participants. Those can be important elements of a qualitative design because they end up allowing you to be able to make comparison and contrast between different individuals or different settings. And that all leads to your analysis at the end of the day. So you're asking a lot of questions at the point when you start to get to the nitty-gritty of your methods, and you're asking, you know, what tools, what procedures, what strategies, what techniques are most appropriate for the study of whatever it is that you're studying. And then asking yourself, who are my most appropriate informants or participants? Okay, so those sampling decisions. So I'm going to go into giving an example of a study that I worked on with a number of colleagues as part of a research practice partnership that I'm director of. And we do studies all in New York State around issues affecting pre-K through 12 students. So children and youth up to about 18, 19 years old. And in this particular example, we approached this study through a social ecological and a positive youth development lens. So those are the frameworks that we combined, and I'll show what that looked like for us and what reasons we had for that. And then the approach that we used was multiple case study, because our intent here was to really think about, you know, we have particular settings across New York State where we have better than expected outcomes for youth of color and youth who are growing up in poverty. And we wanted to go investigate why we're getting better outcomes in those particular schools. So this is a particular kind of multiple case study. It's focused on what we call positive outliers. And we use quantitative measures for the most part to identify those positive outliers. So it was a multiple case study, and then the methods that we used to collect data included interviews, focus groups, and documents. So as you can see here, we had some selection criteria. This is another really important part of a qualitative design, is asking yourself the question, who will be included in my study and who will not be included in my study? Or what entities or what contexts will be included in my study and what will not be included in my study? Those are all super important things for those of you who've already done your IRB protocols. You'll be asked that specific question. What are your exclusionary criteria? So in this particular study, our exclusionary criteria included all schools that didn't rise to the top as positive outliers. And you can see that we identified a total of 7 positive outlier schools around New York State. And we have a whole bunch of regression analyses that show why those schools were identified in our methods and procedures reports. But then we also did a follow-up second study where we went in and got another set of data from students in the school. So we went in first phase and did interviews and focus groups and document collections with all the adults, not all, but key informants like district leaders, school psychologists, counselors, and so on. And then in the second phase, we returned and got data from young people between 9th and 12th grade at 2 of the schools. So I'm just going to give a little bit of background. This is something all of you who have already done your dissertation proposals have had to do, right? At some point is to describe your theoretical framework. So one of the problems that we have in the research on adolescent development is around this perspective that it's more about avoiding problems with young people than about the growth of their competencies as capable agentic adults who are thriving and able to engage with others in positive ways. So we applied this theoretical framework. It was pretty complicated, but it was mostly based on positive youth development, which you can see some of the major categories that are of interest when we apply this framework, having to do with attachment to caring adults and all the way over to harmonious and synergistic environments. This comes from the research literature. And then we applied that to the social ecological frame because, again, we were interested in case study. So case studies are concerned about the contextual details, remember? More so than a narrative inquiry might be, or more so than a phenomenological study would be. So this is an appropriate lens when we're looking at contextual details that matter. And we were very interested from the prior research, the extant research, about those connections between what happens within classrooms and within those near, I'm just adding people in, those peer-to-peer kind of near relationships, and also child and adult relationships within classrooms, with those things that happen at the exo level and the meso level, so things that happen in the school overall, like activities that they're engaged in with others and groups, and then more distally all the way out to macro level factors. So looking at issues around what does this community have available to young people in terms of resources, right? So we applied these 2 lenses in our study. I'm giving this as an example because I want you to see how this is connected to the coding eventually. So again, here is the design. This is actually the second phase design. So we investigated 2 positive outlier schools. We conducted interviews with 22 young people between about 10th grade and 12th grade. We conducted 5 focus groups in those schools. We collected questionnaires and student crafted artifacts that included like journey maps over their lives, the essential kind of key moments that impacted them. We also, let me see, we collected ecological maps as well. We had them construct those about places that were of import to them, where they felt connected with each other or with others. Or places that were just important to them in developing a sense of agency and what they could do in their future lives after high school. So there's a variety of different things. Some people are using photo voice, some just really interesting methods that you can use, different technologies that you can use to collect qualitative data. And then a variety of different documents about just how the school is run, what kinds of activities were available for these kids. So the how and why of coding. So the guiding question here, when we start thinking about, we have this idea about a study, we have some research questions, we have some things about, you know, who the participants, the sample might be, the context might be, all of these things we have some ideas about. And then you ask yourself, okay, once I have data, how do I go about coding it? And what are codes good for in the end? How do they help me be able to make sense of my research question? So what I was going to ask you to do is just take a quick look at that case study that I mentioned to you earlier, to download out of the New York Kids website. And I actually think, and I have a second question here is, so the first question is, what do you see for evidence in this case study? And then the second question is, how would you imagine the data were handled to help develop the case study? So I just kind of wanted to open this up for a little conversation right now. And actually I put the link in the chat earlier. And I think I put copy. Okay, so I'm going to go back. This is just a preview of what our findings were. I'm going to toggle to the case study, if I can do that. No, maybe I don't have it up here.
You can choose share screen and then open the internet browser.
Yeah, it's here.
Yeah.
I'm gonna share screen again. So I'm just gonna, hopefully you have this on your own computer, but I'm just gonna show, let me see, what page is this? So page 3. Maybe actually, 'cause that's the highlights. Okay, so I'm at the bottom of, I think, page 4. So here's just one section of the findings from this particular study. Actually, this is the phase 1 findings. So this is from interviews, focus groups, and document collection, and actually some observation within the schools. And you can see here that we have this finding around voice, choice, and leadership. And as you read through here, you can see some text, and I'm wondering about your thoughts about those 2 questions that I just asked you. About how do you think the, for one thing, what do you see as evidence of a finding? And what I mean by evidence is, like, typically in qualitative studies, you'll use quotes as one form of evidence. That's just one form. I can't see anybody's hands at the moment, so if anybody has a comment, just chime in.
It looks like you did interviews and that's how you got quotes from them. Is that right?
Right. So we have some interviews in here. Yeah, thank you, Alex. So one of the quotes here is that in general, students felt encouraged by educators to raise their voices about issues both inside and outside of school, though acknowledging that, quote, not every problem can get fixed. Okay, so that's a quote that was drawn directly from a student interview. Students felt that they were heard by educators and staff. Okay, I'm sorry, this is the phase 2. And then the quote here is, we've talked to the school principal at how we felt. He's always trying to fix all the problems in our school, and explained Olivia. Okay, so yeah, this was taken from an interview. And then my question to you is, we have this theme here, voice, choice, and leadership. When you think about an interview transcript, and then you think about where we ended up here with this heading, Does anybody have any ideas about how the data were manipulated to get us from a quote in a transcript from one student to a theme in a case study?
Well, you must have gotten, sorry.
Sorry, I suppose it could be statements where students described being able to speak about issues to people in power, but I'm not sure how you would have shorthanded that one.
Yeah, good. So you can start to say like, oh, right, when we went through a transcript, we know that we had a couple of frameworks in our mind. So we had positive youth development. We knew that part of that had to do about developing agency in young people, in a sense that they had a valuable voice to share. So you could expect that when we were starting to design our NVivo file, that we might already front load our code book with some of those codes, parent codes around agency, for example, or around voice. The thing that's tricky there, though, is that those are very abstract terms. So you have to be able to define it for yourself of what you mean by voice or agency, right? So that's one thing. We would know that we would want to start to develop a code book that would attach to what our original theoretical frame might look like, right? Or was starting to shape up to look like. And also we were interested in keeping it open to emerging codes, to things that we didn't expect to see, right? So yeah, we would try to take our transcript and say, okay, what do we already expect through this lens, okay, that we're applying to this study, might already need to be front loaded in our code book, and then start to build out from there. So there would be a layering approach. This is how I do it. A lot of people do analysis in very different ways. And let me just stop here for a second. I'm gonna just pause, because one of the things that you'll have to make a determination about is there's a continuum in terms of your logic when you approach trying to make sense of anything. You can work very deductively, or you can work very inductively, or you can work in some middle zone called abductive reasoning, where you may be using deductive and inductive reasoning in concert with each other. So when you talk to any analyst, you may get, or any group of analysts, you may get very different opinions about how they would approach data. And part of it's because we all bring with us a particular set of ways of thinking, right? And so even when you're working with faculty members, you may hear different opinions or thoughts about how you should organize your data, right? And that's because many of us were trained either to be deductive reasoners or inductive reasoners or somewhere in between, right? You also have to think about that the goal of your research makes a difference. So if you are attempting to identify how a set of ideas, concepts might be apparent in a particular data set, say it's numbers and numbers of pages of documents, and you want to identify how a particular concept or term or something is done in those documents, and you actually are interested in quantifying that eventually, then you may use a deductive approach more effectively. That means that you would front load your coding scheme with those deductive categories, and you would plug your data into those deductive categories. And that's qualitative coding, right? But it can be easily flipped to a quantitative analysis to see how many incidences or instances of something that you've seen across different documents, for example. That's one extreme of deductive, and some people call that a priori coding. Okay, so you're already preconceiving what you want to see as you do your analysis, what you want to look at. On the other end of the continuum is inductive, and that's where grounded theory is really an approach designed specifically for inductive reasoning, for you to discover new connections and hopefully be able to, you know, propose some kind of theoretical understanding of something that's not very well understood right now. In between is abductive. So you may do a combination, which is what I've done in this study, which is to say, I have this social ecological frame that I'm interested in. And it is very well aligned with case study research, because I know that these contexts, micro to exo and macro, for example, are important to me, and understanding why these particular settings have different outcomes, right? And I know that the positive youth development research is very important to me too, because now I really want to understand how these young people in these schools are impacted by a variety of different things that prior research has informed us really matter about their connections with other adults, their sense of voice and agency, and so on. So in my coding scheme, I started off with some a priori codes. So this excerpt that I'm showing you right now, those codes around like voice and agency were preloaded in my code book. So the first transcript that I uploaded into NVivo, I could start to use those codes. But then I was really interested in seeing how I could open up my data. And I started to break down my codes into subcategories, or what are called child codes in NVivo. So I'm going to come up for air again and ask if anybody has any questions right now, because I'm going to switch screens. But I can do usually more things than one at the same time. So if you have questions or just comments, go ahead.
I actually have a question.
Okay.
So when you're doing something more inductive, like grounded theory, and you're you don't have those codes set up already, can you kind of, like, I guess I'm asking, like, where exactly do they come from? Like, just as you notice themes, you can sort of like make up whatever topics are coming up, or are there, like, how would that be like valid, I guess, is what I struggle with. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, for one thing, most qualitative researchers avoid the word valid. We really try to be careful about not stepping into the ground of positivism, because we just can't go there with qualitative research. So we'll talk about credibility. So what you want to be doing is having some inherent credibility within yourself as you're proceeding. Because the most important thing in a qualitative researcher or research study is really how you use yourself. You are the most important tool. So you activate everything in your study. So I was just talking to a doctoral advisee yesterday, and he is just working through the first stages of his analysis. And he's looking through the lens of multiple masculinities at male teachers and why they leave the profession of teaching. And as he was sharing with me his code book, he was asking me a lot of questions about, his code book. And I said, look, at the very beginning, you kind of have, how do I want to say? You have to be focused when you start on what your intent is. And I actually advised him to put his research questions right in front of his computer, like literally on a big map right in front of his computer, and keep them in mind, because it's very easy to get lost in your coding. I'm seeing a couple of people nod about getting lost in coding. It makes me sad, but you can get really lost in coding because you can end up feeling like everything matters, and everything can be coded in so many different ways. And I said, one of the best things that you can do is really just try to keep yourself very close to your research questions, keep your theoretical framework front and center as well. And then if you are doing truly, Adele, what you're talking about is open coding or inductive coding, right? Then what you're going to want to do is begin to keep track from the very, very start of every time you name something with a code, that you keep a descriptor of it. So you take the minute to describe what the code means to you. And then you consistently work through your data using that code book, that generating code book. Now, as you do that, there's a method called constant comparison where you'll be constantly coming back to your data and asking yourself questions about your data. Oftentimes you'll find that your code book starts to solidify after a while. And it depends upon your data set, depends upon your questions. There's a whole lot of, it depends. But it'll eventually get to a point where you hopefully reach saturation with how many codes you can assign to your data. So for me, if I'm working with a transcript of an interview that's maybe an hour long, 3-hour-long interview transcripts, depending upon how verbose somebody was, by the time I get to the third one, I start to get to a point of saturation when I'm doing inductive coding. And what's important during that time is that you'll start to drift, and you have to just be patient with your drift, but also try to keep yourself focused. What I mean by drift is that you may end up creating, like, there's almost like a flare moment that happens where you're creating a lot of new codes. But you'll also find that you'll start to focus them down, and you may end up finding that you need to merge codes that you created as separate ones earlier on. And that's a totally normal part of the process. And not to be frustrated by that, to just let yourself ride that wave, because it will flare and then it will start to focus down. You may have to circle back to your first set of data, whatever it is that you coded first, to then say, okay, I need to go back through this again because I originally coded it this way, and I want to make sure that my coding is consistent at this point. Does that make some sense?
Yes, that makes a ton of sense. Thank you so much.
Is the reason why you need to, for example, if you're doing grounded theory, it's the reason why you need to document your own assumptions so much in that process, because you don't have necessarily the grounded, you don't have the theoretical framework named at the beginning. Your own ontology and your assumptions based on that context are your theoretical framework. So that becomes the prominent lens that you're viewing the thing through.
Yeah, and exactly. And what I always tell people, with any of these designs, I highly recommend that you keep an interpretive memo. You can use NVivo to do that, to help you with that through annotations or through memos. There's a couple of different ways. There's usually more than 2 ways to do something in NVivo. So to keep those memos, and those become almost like your, your journey map. They become extremely important. And think about it. And when you read someone's research, you really would like to know how they got from here to there. We owe that to our readers. So for you to be able to backtrack that and articulate that journey for your reader is extremely important for your own credibility.
Personally, I think I'm, as you described yourself, like in the middle, I think, but like, because I'm working with Dr. Zhang on like long periods of inquiry. So also like, because we don't know which direction the students are going in, we sort of try to mirror that in being sort of taking grounded theory approach. I wouldn't say we're doing grounded theory, but it's like that.
Yeah.
In that we generally have, like for me, I like the learning ecologies lens, but as you said, like I'm also trying to be open as much as possible to think what is the current theory missing, or what could be added through what I'm doing. So I try to do mostly inducive, but as I'm building those, as you said, incorporating some checking process to constantly check what's coming out.
There's a really good text when I get out of share mode. I'll pull it out of my EndNote. There are a couple of them, but Saldana has written a really nice book on coding, and I talk about first cycle and second cycle coding in the ways that I think are really comprehensible. So I recommend that text. It's a really good one. Okay, I will carry on. So I'm just going to show you again. So eventually, after we did the coding of all of these data, we were able to go through these multiple cycles of coding. So there was the initial generation of the code book, and then we get into second cycle coding, and second cycle coding is looking for patterns. We're also looking for discrepant data at that point. And this study, we identified these 4 major patterns related to students' experiences in these positive outlier schools. So you can just see how those broke down on this little pie. And then some of the kind of key indicators that we found related to each one of these things. So the cultivating student agency, for example, we heard coming through loud and clear in these students. And then you can see some of the bullets there of some of the major findings we had around that and the evidence that we used for that. If you're interested in where that went, the cross-case report, the big report of all the data or all the findings is on the New York Kids website. So from here, so you can see here just some excerpts of the data that are used as evidence of this particular finding. So here's a quote from a particular student. By the way, these are all pseudonyms. That's the other thing I would highly recommend, is that when you transfer data into NVivo, that you're careful about how you use real names. If you've promised to use pseudonyms in your study, you might want to make sure that when you transfer it into NVivo, that you transfer in everything clean, de-identified, so that you don't have any slips as you start to pull the data out. I tend to do that. And then these are just some of the documents. We took photos, and then you can see other excerpts. And this is one of those journey maps that we digitize actually from students' Post-it notes. So those are the different kinds of sources of data I just wanted to show you that contribute to each one of these themes and evidence of the themes. So I'm about ready to take you guys into NVivo, and I think it's about time for that if you're ready, unless anybody has any questions at this point. Okay, so I foregrounded a little bit that there are these pieces of the puzzle that we all want to have in place, you know, have clear in our heads. What is our theoretical frame? Why are we looking through this frame? What is our approach? We have lots of choices. There needs to be good synergy between the approach we've taken and our theoretical framework and the research questions. And then finally, the methods piece of the puzzle, that there's a variety of different methods and that we've chosen ones that are appropriate. So this should all fit together nicely. Okay, you're building a house with solid walls and I see those as all part of that. Maybe it's a roundhouse. It's got 3 walls. The steps that you take when you're getting ready to do your coding are going to be the preparation of your data, including the naming of their source files. Then you're going to be uploading your source files into NVivo. You'll be assigning attributes to, at least I recommend, and like I just also want to say here that people do this kind of work in all different ways. So you're hearing my perspective on how I do it. So what I tend to do is I assign attributes to source files right from the very beginning before I even upload them. So I create a classification sheet and I'll show you what that looks like. Then you go through the coding of the data and then the generating of code reports, okay? Keep in mind that NVivo doesn't, or any of these software programs don't make sense for you. They're merely tools for you to organize data to help you make sense. Okay, so they're not going to produce findings, so to speak, for you. They're going to give you information back in ways that hopefully you can digest and make sense out of. So the big picture here, I just made an image of this for you. And so there's kind of a few different stages. You organize your data, you prepare it. Like I said, it's good to de-identify it and before you actually start to apply codes to it. Then you're uploading the source files, you're assigning the attributes, coding the data, and generating code reports. So there's an organization and then the compiling or the interpretation of the data and then compiling the evidence by whatever lines of inquiry or research questions that you've put in your study. This is just one graphic they used with one of the teams that I was working on a study with. So as I said, yeah, you have these tasks that the analyst is making where you're preparing data source files and so on that I just showed you in the previous slide. And then what you see here is just our process. It's kind of a flow chart of how we went through intercoder reliability testing. Now, this is not necessary in all qualitative studies. And in fact, some qualitative researchers would say this is not appropriate for a qualitative study at all because it's using reliability tests that are really coming from more of a positivistic point of view and perspective on how we make sense of the world. This particular study, I felt it was necessary to do it. We had a variety of different kinds of source files that we needed to work with, and we had a large team of coders. So keep in mind that depending upon the size of your team and how many people are working on your study, if you're a solo researcher, obviously you don't need to do intercoder reliability work. Although maybe I shouldn't say that's obvious because sometimes people do that to track their own reliability as they code. So there are tools within NVivo for you to run reliability tests on your coding if you wish to use that. I don't do it a whole lot, but I just wanted to show you an example that this is one of the ways that you can do that. Okay, so let's get started. I'm just going to go through the slides first to show you, and then I'm going to open up the NVivo file and kind of just go live with what it would look like to upload files and begin to associate attributes to files, and then show you how you might pull some queries out of your data set. Drop that down. So depending upon what version of NVivo you have, I believe I have NVivo 12 plus these days. This screenshot I think is pretty current, but it might be a little bit old. But even with the newer versions, they all pretty much look the same. And that you're going to have an import feature where you'll be able to upload your source file. So that's step one. The next thing that I recommend that people do is to use classifications and attributes to assign to your data. The reason why you do this is because you're always looking in qualitative studies to identify patterns and contrast discrepant data, where things might differ for different people or within different contexts. So you're going to want to be able to have a way to pull the data out by those different kinds of qualities or characteristics, okay? So typically I'll create some kind of attribute list. So one option is to create your own attribute list right in NVivo. And the other is to download if you're working with a mixed method. I'm trying to remember who is working mixed method. We had at least, Adele, you're doing mixed method, right? And anybody else who might be using some kind of scaled survey or something, if you have the attributes or classifications in SPSS, I just tried this the other day and I was like, woohoo, it worked. So I was very excited. So you can download attributes and classifications right out of SPSS or an Excel file into your NVivo file. So I'm going to move our screen over here. So you can see here, and one of my studies, actually the one that you guys were just looking at the case study from, we were concerned about differences in different schools by a variety of demographics the state of New York tends to collect data around. So things like economic disadvantage, i.e. poverty levels, the percentage of English language learners, and so on. We had these different ethnic and cultural groups that we wanted to be able to compare and contrast the data from different schools on those things. So we built the attributes into the NVivo file so that at any time I could pull out data around, for example, student agency. If I wanted to see how a student agency was approached or perceived by students differently in schools with different demographics, I could pull down a matrix report, for example, a matrix query, they call it, a matrix report or query out of NVivo to do that for me. And then I could explore where I'd contrast in these by these different kinds of qualities or characteristics. So I'll stop there for a minute. Do you have questions about attributes and classifications, or why would we do that?
Can I ask, if you've already imported the data without doing this attribute, how to do it later, like once you've already imported?
Never redo it, Jillian. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. No, you're fine. You're fine. It's no worries. You can build the attribute sheet, like here's your values and this is what it is. And then you can go in and there's a couple different ways to do it. You can assign it by file. So if you have a source file, for example, an interview from a particular person, it may be a file classification, but you can also assign attributes by cases. So there you may have case classifications. It depends on what you're doing with your study. But what you would do at that point is go into that original file. So say I have interview 1. I can go on and click that and assign attributes to it after I've already created my attribute sheet. So at any time you can create an attribute sheet would be your next step, right? And then you would assign each one of your files. And it's pretty quick. It actually would be like click, 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 click. So I'll try to show you how to do that and do a little demo for you if that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Okay. So the next thing that we're thinking about, this is the, so then the coding of data is the next thing that you do. And coding is different than attribute assignment. And the big difference is that coding is what meaning you make out of your data. Attributes are some quality of your data. Does that make sense? Some people have been confused about that. But what I mean by that again is that I may have an interview transcript that comes from a English language learner, and she is in an urban school. That would be an attribute of that particular transcript. So I would be able to click on English language learner, urban school, whatever it is that I wanted to assign to that particular file, right? You can also do it by case. Coding data says, what do I actually see in this source file? So in this transcript or in this document, in relation to my research questions, through my theoretical framework, with whatever code book, whether it's been an a priori code book or what I'm creating, what do I see in my data related to my research question? So that's when you're coding the data. So this is what meaning you're making out of your data itself. So different people deal differently and have, like, I wish I were Tony Stark and had like the whole wall of screens in front of me, but I don't have. I don't know who knows Tony Stark. I like these kinds of things. But anyway, I personally have 2 big monitors in front of me when I'm at home. And I also have my little iPad over here to just keep track of the text messages and my calendar. And I still miss appointments all the time, but that's because it's over here. And I've got these other screens. So, for those of you who have room on your monitors to move things around, you may actually want to draw out your code book periodically, right? To see it separately outside of NVivo. Sometimes people like to do that. Sometimes people export the code book into an Excel spreadsheet because that helps them be able to look through their code book more easily as they're coding to kind of keep track of all their code book. So there's a variety of different things that you can do. And within NVivo itself, if you just have one little humble screen, you can just toggle between your NVivo nodes and their descriptions as you're going along. So, I just showed an example here. I don't know if you can see it of, here's an Excel spreadsheet. I had a particular set of codes in this other study that I did on workforce development. And, I tend to have a general adult code, the big category, with a bunch of other subcodes underneath it, child codes. And so this particular quote fit into this category of workforce development, stability, and remodeling pretty well. So you can have different ways that you set up your code book. And then I think this is the last one that I have about, you can toggle between the NVivo nodes and their descriptions. So I don't know if you can see this on my screen, but you can see that I have a transcript over here on the right in NVivo. And I also have highlighted a segment of text here. And this segment of text, I can go in and take a look at my node properties at any time to see which one of my nodes I really want to use for this particular segment of text. Because sometimes when your code book gets pretty big and your study is pretty complicated, you know, you may need to be going down to those node properties and just reminding yourself, how did I define this node? The point here is to try to be as consistent as possible with your coding. The second thing that I would say about coding is not to be shy about coding a lot and not to be shy about coding and recoding same segments of text. That's okay. Okay, there's no reason why you can't code a segment of text in 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 ways if it actually fits. So the next thing that you can do is simple code queries. So you can see on the screen right here, it's a little bit hard to see, but this is, and I'm going to open it up in just a second. This is just a simple code query. And the reason why you do a simple code query is you want to capture all the data you coded around a particular code. So for example, if I wanted to see everything I coded around student agency, I could just do a simple code query and it'll pull out everything from every source file I have in there that's coded at that code. You can also do a text query, and people like to see these oftentimes to visualize their data. I don't find them particularly helpful with understanding the extent, or I guess I would say the maybe extent, frequency, even the gravity. In other words, the importance of a particular concept. But I do find it helpful for me to see the connections between a particular concept or term and how it's related to other things. So this is just a visual map of if in my current study on the COVID pandemic, we're looking at stress indicators. And so just to look at the concept of stress was interesting for me to pull out a text query on it. The next kind of query that you can do is called a matrix query. And I find these very, very useful when I want to see how maybe one participant and another contrast with each other, or how one context contrasts with another context. So they're really good for comparison contrasting. So you want to do this for compare and contrast by a case. You can do a matrix query by attribute or by a code. So this little visual that I have down here that's just raw data. I just pulled out of a query that I did on my current study. This one, we're looking at different ways that leaders frame the COVID-19 pandemic. And so what we've done is a subset of interviews across 6 different schools. And you can see here that we have some variation in this set on the different kinds of frames these leaders were using. We applied, in this case, an a priori scheme of frames that were from extant literature around motivation and so on. So they can be super helpful for that. Okay, I did include this slide about, these are some recommendations I have for you for resources about qualitative data analysis. The Miles Huberman and Saldana book, that actually might have a new edition by now, is super helpful to be thinking about how you might use matrices. So one of the things I'm not going to have time to share with you today is that oftentimes when I pull code reports, I'll also create an Excel spreadsheet where I'll start to break down in that second cycle coding when I'm trying to make sense of what my patterns are. And I try to identify where I see particular patterns and dimensions of those patterns across different individuals or different settings. So matrices are often very helpful with that kind of thing. And NVivo doesn't do the matrix for you. You have to go through this cycle of coding and then pull it out. And you can use tables for that. I use Excel. The Kressel book on qualitative inquiry research design gets into more detail about those 5 approaches that I highlighted today. But like I said, there's plenty of other really good research out there about, you know, just designs, different design ideas that you could use. There are hybrids, and there's really interesting stuff out there. So, and then the Saldana book that I was telling you about is really helpful to just get the language and examples about how you go through different cycles of coding. So first cycle and second cycle coding, for example, is super helpful there. All right. All right, I'm going to pause for a second while I go to the NVivo file. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Okay, so this is the point where if you did have a chance to download a trial version, or you have NVivo on your computer, you could even try a different program. Does anybody else have a different qualitative program on their computer that they want to try out? Okay. You know, some people have used a program called Deduce. I don't know if anybody's heard about that. It's DEDOOSE. My understanding is it's free, which is great. But I've also heard some not so good stories about losing data, which I don't know. How many of you, by the way, have ever lost data along the path of collecting it and analyzing it? No? Yay. Good. I had an experience years ago, and did anybody in here? No?
Yeah.
You did? Yeah, it's a horrifying moment. It's one of those moments where you want to roll around on the ground and just pound your fist. That happened to me years ago when I was working with a colleague, and I hadn't resaved the file after having done a lot of coding. And she ended up taking the file. I didn't tell her not to, so it's my fault, but she ended up taking that or master file and uploading it onto her Mac. And it blew up. I don't even know, I don't know where it went, but it went badly. So yeah, so be super, super careful about anyway, protecting your data and making sure you do backups and everything as often as you can. Yeah, so let me see here. I'm going to go into NVivo now. I'm going to show you an example file. This one, okay, so this is a study that I have been doing on the, let me see here, collaboration community. Yeah, okay, so yeah, this is a different study, but I'll show it to you anyway. So this study I'm doing on the pandemic and effects on actually, I'm not sharing screen, am I? Let me show screen. There you go. Okay. That out of the way. A little hard on this screen to see everything. So this study, we were asking questions about job satisfaction and stress, as well as collaboration. And this is based on a survey study that had open-ended responses. We collected data in, I don't know, about 47 total schools around New York State on this one over the past 6 months or so. And you can see here that the coding scheme that I came up with started with, yes, we knew we were asking questions about job satisfaction. We also knew we were asking questions about stress, so those were preloaded. And we knew that we were asking questions about collaboration. But we also had a bunch of emergent codes here around things like academic progress, concerns about academic progress, adaptations, changes, and new learnings in each of these school settings, about the what was kind of unexpected, the impacts of community on and community beliefs, values, parents' roles, communication, service to community related to the pandemic. Social emotional well-being of students came up quite a lot. So you can see that in each one of these categories, we have a different level of detail in terms of the child codes. The other thing I wanted to show you here is that in terms of case classifications, this is the case classification sheet we used in our SPSS file, and we were able to just download that directly into NVivo. So that might be helpful for people who are doing quantitative and qualitative work. So then we have the codes, and I showed you that already. Let me see here. And then the last thing you need to see is that, you have all these files. I wanted to pause here for a second to just let you take a minute to look at this file kind of inventory. So do you notice anything? I gave you a little bit of detail about what this study is about. What do you think the reason is that I have named these files the way I named these files? Any guesses?
Put attributes to the name of the file.
Yeah. So each of my so what it's kind of right. Yeah. Kind of said is this relates to the attributes. This is a handy way for me to automatically assign attributes within NVivo and give each of my schools a name that's unique in my file set. So each of these has a number, okay? So the school number 1 was the first one to complete our survey. What else do we notice about that school name? That file name, I should say. Yeah, the attributes, right? So what do we think? ES?
Elementary.
Yeah, it's an elementary school. The AVG is
Average.
It's average needs. Okay, that means the poverty index is average. It's not a high needs school. And then it's a rural school. Now, this was important because when you think back to those 3 buckets that I talked about, theoretical framework and approach and then method, what I know in this study, by the way, we use social ecological theory as a framework. So it was really important for us to look at differences and impact of the pandemic in different kinds of communities, right? So rural versus urban versus suburban. So we wanted to make sure that was built into our design so that we could start to pull out any kinds of differences we might see, comparison and contrast across these. So thinking carefully about how you name your source files is also, advisable to do that. It makes it super easy for you to just be able to identify each of your files and then to be able to assign attributes to them automatically when you bring them into, well, I shouldn't say automatically, you still have to assign the attributes as you bring them into NVivo. Okay, drop that one down. Okay, let me see if I can not mess this up. Whenever I try to do live coding, it's something always goes wrong. so I'm going to try to do this for a second, and then I'm just going to kind of open it up to questions again. So just taking it from the top, when you want to start to work with your data set, like I said, this is a completely raw file. There's nothing in it. So one of the first things that I might want to do is I might want to say, okay, do I want to classify my files by using some kind of attribute sheet? And I just gave you a whole bunch of reasons why you might want to do that. But again, it depends upon your study of whether or not that matters to you, if that's a good idea for you or not. But to do that anyway, you can go into file classifications. Sorry, I'm gonna, there's a little directions here when you open up an NVivo file about what this means. Close that. So I just right-clicked on file classification, and you can see you've got two choices that I mentioned earlier.
I'm sorry, it's not showing
Sorry.
the screen.
You're not seeing this?
No.
Okay, let me go back out again. Do share.
It might have opened in a new window.
I think, do you see it now?
Yeah, we see something different.
Yes. I
Yeah,
just
we see it now.
keep having to go every time I switch to a different thing. I have to do that. So sorry. Thank you for just interrupt me. So under file classifications, you're going to see that you can create or import file classifications. So like I said, you can import them from an Excel spreadsheet, you can import them from SPSS, or you can create your own just new file classification sheet. So if I want to say new file classification, you'll see this window open up, and I can assign whatever I want to this classification sheet. So for example, I might want to say that this classification sheet has to do with I was thinking about an example that I could upload. I'm just going to say this is an equity one. I didn't use any of my raw files from my study here. And you can see that, you know, you can add one or more predefined classifications. I've never used this myself. Anybody else on this call who's used NVivo ever used that? Want to share?
Text.
Yeah, I haven't done that, but I get, you know, this is basically saying what kind of data is this? Right, so you can use this if you want to be able to classify things by like what type of data or kind of data. Is it a bill, is it a blog, is it a whatever, audio visual material? You can do that. In my case, I'm gonna say that maybe I'm just gonna say equity designations or something like that, whatever it might be. And then when I go into this, let's see. Oops. This is where I screwed up. Okay, so I'm going to say new attribute. Okay, this is the screen that you want to get to. You can go to values at that point, and you can start to add in values. So you can say, I was just trying to think about, I'm doing a study right now on different kind of ways of thinking about equity. So, so one of them is a compensatory view of equity, right? You can assign a color to it. Maybe I want to make that dark blue. I can add another, and I'll just maybe call this one just equity. As in, I'll say equity is an equality, an equal view of equity. And you can create as many of these as you want, and you can say, okay. Oh, name can't be empty. What did I do? Oh, okay. All right, so I've got a couple attributes in there. Like I said, this is a super simple version that I'm talking about right now, but you saw the other example that had, you know, a whole list of about 15 different attributes that you could assign to your data. So depending upon the complexity of your data set, how many different attributes or classifications you want to assign, you can make these really quite complex if you want. So say now I'm ready to import my first file. What I'm also saying here is that maybe I'm going to do open coding. I'm going to use inductive coding right now. I mean, I have no preconceived ideas about what's in my data set right now. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to grab a file. And please don't judge me for how my desktop looks right now. It's a mess. And there was one file on equity. Oops, back. So this is actually a document. It's not an interview. But for this purpose, it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to import it. And now it's going to ask me, and so to your point, Jillian, if you had attributes already built in, this is automatic, but you can always go back and assign them to your files later on. So I just uploaded this. It's asking me about attribute values. And I can say equity designations, let's pull it down, equity compensatory, maybe, I don't know. Whatever I decide my attributes, I can assign that there and then. So now I'm ready to start to code my data. What that classification allows me to do is down the road, I can pull code reports out where I can find coded data that has these different attributes associated with it. So you saw that matrix code of the different leaders frames. I can pull a matrix report down like that so I can compare and contrast across them. So from there, I go into my files. And I like to have NVivo set up so that I can see, everybody does this a little bit differently, but I can see my file on the side. Let me see if I can move this around. How do I move you guys? I need to move you guys. All right. So here's my file. All right, so here's some of my raw data. I'm saying, okay, maybe this is a document that I want to study. I want to look at this document and maybe 20 other documents that all have to do with equity, and I want to code them. Right now, I don't have necessarily a particular set of codes that I want to use for this, a code book for this, but I want to start working with this data set. So what I can start to do then is say, all right, how might I begin? So this is an equity self-reflection. And I was just going down here and I noticed that one of the things in this particular document talks about assuming collective responsibility to learn about student cultures and communities. Now that might be interesting to me depending upon what theoretical framework I'm bringing to bear, because maybe part of my framing for this study around equity is that I want to look at documents that see things that, is this a collective? Is this an individual thing? Maybe I want to, learn something about how people become more equity oriented in their work, right? So whatever the study might be around. And maybe I decide collective is kind of a key concept that I know I want to code about, right? Across all of these documents. So what I simply do when I have no codes built in here, right, is I right click on it. And you can't see it because it's on the screen. Let me see if I can. That's interesting. Yeah, I can't move it down. Well, maybe I can. Let me see here. No. So up here somewhere, can I drop that down? Can I move that?
I think if you put the thing you want to highlight to the bottom of the page, maybe, and then if you scroll down a bit.
Video panel. Well, I think I can do it up here too. The thing about NVivo is there's normally like a whole bunch of different ways that you can do the same thing. So when I show you something, there's probably like 5 other ways to do it. I think I can use this. Yeah. Okay, so I'm up at the top and I'm going to say I want to code the selection. Notice though across your top bar that there's a lot of different ways you can do this. Code NVivo, I haven't ever used that myself. That may actually assign automatically a code that's related to the terms that are in here. That's what NVivo code means, the actual terms that a participant or a document uses. I'm not even sure what range code is, and uncode is pretty clear. That's when you delete the code if you made a mistake. And auto code, I believe also is like, it's going to assign a code based upon whatever the content of the text is. I don't know how people use auto coding. I've never used it, and I guess it could be useful somehow. It must be because it's there. But then again, there are a lot of things that are around that are not useful. So anyway, there's a few different options. But what you do at this point is I say code selection. And now it's saying, okay, I basically don't have any codes. I get some different options here, sentiment, relationships, cases. So this is just a code. This isn't a case that I'm coding or anything like that right now. So let me see. I don't usually go into it this way. I'm going to say, okay, this is how you do it. So this is a new code. And I think I was just saying that maybe collective would be like a key term that I might use as a code or code category. And so I'm going to just say code selection at this. Now, normally what I do at this point, if I could have pulled the screen down, is I make sure that every time I start coding, this is super important, that, let me see here. I said it's super important and then I stopped talking. Okay, so here's my codes over here on this bar. And this will get populated with a whole lot of codes like the example I showed you before. And what I'm going to do here that's very important is you will assign some code properties to it. And so this is when you provide a description. So what did I mean by collective? When I created this code, what did I mean? So this code category, I could say, code refers to all excerpts related to, like, maybe, I don't have to say all of that, but to collective, what did we say this was? Collective responsibility for equity. Okay, and then I say, okay. And now I'm going to start to layer upon layer upon layer upon layer, be coding my data, right? One of the things that'll happen as you move along is you'll start to make some decisions about what is the highest level versus a lower level. So that's where you can then create another code and you can just drag and drop it. So you can take a child code and drop it into a parent code. So I'm going to stop there for a second. I think we went through coding. For the most part, I'm going to stop share for a minute. Is there any particular trick of the trade that you would like me to show you how to do right now?
Well, Professor Kristen?
Yeah.
It's Isabel here. I have a question about longitudinal data, longitudinal analysis. When we're working with, say, a file for a case or student A, and you have pre-test data and post-test data, how do you code those when what you're looking at to find is a change from document A to document B?
Oh, okay. I would use a matrix code query.
Okay.
Yeah, so you've used the same code book for both of those?
Okay.
Is that what you've done, or you haven't done it yet?
Right. So I have the codes, but the codes are not, say, in document A in the pretest, some of them are not there, and some emerge in document B at the post-test. So if I'm looking at the change or the learning that's happening, and I'm interested in the categories actually of the kind of learning that happens, I think what I'm coding is not document A and B, but the change from A to B. And I'm trying to figure out how I can do that manually, and that's what I did, and it's really a lot of work, but how would I do that in NVivo?
Yeah, so I think, so I would upload both of the documents into NVivo, and then you have one code book that you would use for both of these things, right? For these documents. Yeah. Okay, and then what you can do is
Okay.
Yeah. One of the things that you can do is display like coding stripes. That's actually a really helpful tool. Have you used that?
Okay.
Let me see here. I'm gonna share screen with you. Yeah, one of the ways to see contrast that's really helpful is to show the coding stripes. So if I look at a file and I want to compare it even just visually, you can go up to the coding stripes here and say, I want to see all the codes in this particular. Now, I didn't color code this, but you can make it really pretty and color code it. But I can see all of the codes that run through this particular text. All right, so that's one visual way that you can see your data. But what I was suggesting, and I'm not sure if I understand what your data set would look like, Isabel, but what you can do is pull one of those matrix queries. So I don't know if I have any results here. Oh, these are, I think, just my, I think these are just my symbol queries. Oh yeah, so this is the results of a simple query, okay? But what you might have to do, Isabel, is you may have to download like a matrix query out of NVivo and then do the analysis, even color coding it within like Excel or something like that.
Okay.
Okay, so there's probably a second step for you to do that.
Okay.
There are some really cool tools with the visualizations that I think I'm not sure if I have any of the visualizations shared in here. Okay, no, I don't. Stop share for a second. I was just working on an analysis today, and I just wanted to show you that when you do query reports, there are a variety of different visuals that you can use. And so this one I'm going to continue to work with, but I'll show you in just a second. I know we have to wrap up. This is something that I just pulled out of NVivo, just about those leaders frames that I was telling you about. So I had 6 principal interviews, and then you can start to visualize differences between them using some of the visualization, sources, tools in NVivo. So there's a lot of different things that you can play around in there. Those text searches, like I talked to you about and showed you, those provide connections of ideas across a particular concept. Right? That kind of visualization, you can do a matrix report that compares and contrasts across a variety of different, source files or even cases, and show that visualization. So that might be a kind of cool thing for you to do, Isabel, with those 2 files, is to just see where the bumps are and the differences between those 2. So there's lots of different ways you can map it, and then, you can always pull data out of NVivo and use other things like Excel to be able to manipulate your data into different kinds of forms, data displays.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Like I said, a lot of the just how do you do this and how do you do that? There are lots of good YouTube videos out there for you to just be like, okay, what did she say about that? How do I assign an attribute again? How do I upload a file? How do I organize, my code book, those kinds of things. There's lots of videos out there that can guide you through those kinds of things. What I tried to give you tonight is more kind of like the tips of what I've learned as I've gone along, always with the caveat that everybody's data set's a little different. That, when you put your pieces together of your design, they need to make sense together. They should be in synchronicity with each other. So your code book, if I look at your code book, I should be able to understand something about your theoretical framework. Right? If I read your code book, I should be able to understand what your research questions are, or at least be close. I almost should be able to generate it right from your code book. Okay, so it should be that intuitive and that connected. I hope this was helpful and not daunting. I think it's an exciting and also stressful time when you're first trying to make sense of and it depends upon the extent of data that you have. And it can be daunting, but have some patience and faith that, you'll work through it, and you may feel focused and then flare out and feel lost, but eventually you're going to come back to getting your focus again. So just not to lose your way along the way. Keep your notes, keep your patience, and have some faith that it will make sense. And you'll, the longer you sit with your data and the more frequently you sit with your data and you try to make sense of it, the more progress you're going to make. And I always just tell people, don't let your data go cold. You pay the price. You really do. If you let it go cold in your brain for more than a few days, at least in my case, there's so much work to get myself going again. So I'll leave you with my student, my one student who's studying marginalization of male teachers. I just said, you have got to build into your life these times in a disciplined way that you work with your data. And he's waking up at 4 o'clock, 3 days a week, so that he can fit it in his life. So it takes a lot of effort. I give you all credit, and just reach out if you need anything. I will make the PowerPoint available, after this, so you can take a look at it if it's helpful.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Wilcox, for coming in here on a Thursday night and spending 2 hours with us going through this. We really appreciate you. We're so glad that you're back and you're here and that you've invited. We have a lot of students from EPL. I'm so happy to see that. And so I'm actually gonna leave our website, our new website that's up here in the chat. So the recording from this will be in our past events section, and any upcoming events are going to be on the upcoming events section. I also want to thank Woody and Arwa, who are in person there, for setting up the tech, because I'm on Long Island. So thank you so much. Arwa is our events coordinator and Woody is our treasurer. And so I really appreciate their help with this, and everyone else in ETAP Docs that's helped organize this. So just a big round of applause to everybody who made this a success today. And thank you all for coming and showing up.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Night.
Hi, Adele.
Oh, hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you? You emailed Matt, right?
Yes.
Excellent.
It's so nice to meet you. Get this glare off. So thank you so much. This was so great tonight. And